Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to invite up WNYC reporters to come talk to us about some of the issues that are animating the election this year, and we have time to be able to take questions from you guys. These are some of the best in the biz. So if you have questions about the election and just politics in general, these are the ones you want to ask. So welcome Brigid, Bergin, and David Brand up here, everybody.
City, California, I'm Wayne Brown.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, so David Brand, Brigid, Bergin. Folks are probably aware that New York City mayor and your local council member are not the only things that you're going to be voting on in the election in November, right? There are also 5 ballot questions, more than half of which have to do with housing. So that's why we have WNYC senior politics reporter Brigid Bergin and WNYC's housing reporter David Brand, both here to walk us through the ballot questions. Brigid, before we get to the questions themselves, how does an issue land on the ballot in the first place?
Well, first, good afternoon, everybody. It is so fun to be here. It's absolutely beautiful out. In this particular case, Sean, these questions are landing on the ballot because Mayor Adams convened what's called a Charter Revision Commission. As I'm sure, based on that trivia quiz, most of you know that the city charter is the governing document of New York City. It's kind of like our constitution. And one of the ways that it can be changed is through a Charter Revision Commission. So last year, the mayor pulled together a commission and charged it with looking at how it could revise the city charter to address the city's housing crisis. That was its main assignment. However, during the course of its public hearings and hearing testimony from the government groups, its purview expanded. And that's why, in addition to some of the revisions to housing issues, we're also talking about some elections issues.
So David, let's look at some of these ballot questions that relate to housing. One of them says it would fast track affordable housing developments. The other would simplify review of the, quote, modest housing and infrastructure projects. Both of those seem to acknowledge that it does take a long time to build things here. What exactly would those measures do if they were passed?
Yeah, well, before I answer the question, I just want to wield some of the power that you had and say that I'm so excited to be here in Throggs Neck with Bergin. Cool, that feels good. So, as Sean said, housing is on the ballot. Let's talk about the first 2 questions that are going to appear on everyone's ballots. And they're kind of similar, and they're both designed to streamline the approval process for building new housing. The main way they're going to do that is by cutting the city council out of the review process. So that the first question would relate to 100% affordable housing funded or financed by the government, as well as new housing projects proposed for the 12 community districts that have accounted for the lowest number of affordable housing units in the previous 5 years. A little complicated, there's going to be some math involved there, but those locations right now, like the South Shore of Manhattan, South Shore of Staten Island, Upper West Side of Manhattan, Northeast Queens, I imagine this section of the Bronx as well. So that's causing a little controversy because on the one hand, you have the 100% affordable housing. A lot of people are getting behind that. A lot of people are maybe a little more suspect around the, singling out specific community districts. But people on Charter Revision Commission said these are important for speeding up the approval process and getting more housing built. The second question would also fast track the approval process specifically for what they call modest, quote, modest new developments. They're defining that as projects that would be 30% larger than current zoning rules allow. So again, similarly, cutting the city council out of that process, and final approval would be with the city planning commission.
So another ballot question establishes an affordable housing appeals board. What is that?
Yeah, so I mentioned some of the controversy about those first 2. This one is the most controversial and is causing the most pushback because it would create this 3-member panel involving the mayor, the city council speaker, and the borough president in the borough that a project is proposed in. And so to take a step back here, the reason that the Charter Revision Commission is proposing this one is to try to limit the authority of the city council and individual council members. Because the way the land use review process works right now is that the council member representing the affected district basically has ultimate authority, because of this tradition of member deference in the city council where the full body will vote in line with the local member on projects in their districts. So say you're a developer proposing a 10-story building on a block or a lot zone for 5 stories. If the city council member opposes that or is listening to the voices of the community who oppose that and they say, I'm going to reject that, the developer will probably just cut their losses and say, well, this is dead on arrival. I'm not going to even begin the approval process. This would be a workaround where a developer could then go through the whole process, and even if the city council rejected their application, they could then appeal to this 3-member board and just try to convince 2 members, likely the mayor and the borough president, to approve it, and it would go through. So that's the biggest change.
You mentioned, and I might embarrass myself here though, uniform land use review process.
Very good.
How many people have done the power broker here before? All the way through, not just partially. So people who know Proper Moses, of course, are familiar with you. Just talk about what it is and why it's important.
You live,
You
you learn. So this is kind of the ultimate in impenetrable jargon, but it is basically just the formal approval process for a land use change, a zoning change, starting with the Department of City Planning certifying an application, whether that's from a private developer or from the city itself, especially in the case of these neighborhood level rezonings. Then the public review process, the public hearing, of course, community board, and community board vote, an advisory recommendation, whether to approve, reject, approve with modifications, reject with modifications, goes to the borough president, city planning commission, and then ultimately culminating in a binding vote from the city council.
So Brigid, there's some politics at play here, right? Because the city council leans a lot further left than the moderate mayor, right? And council leadership is opposed to these housing measures, even though ostensibly they would build more affordable housing. So what gives?
So currently, the city council leans further left. One of the things that David said several times there was it is cutting the council out of the process. The way our city government is structured, the mayor, the executive, already has a lot of power. And so our legislative branch, the city council, has power over budgeting and power over land use. Those are the 2 big areas where it can exert authority, and oftentimes the council member is closer to the issues on the ground than perhaps the borough president, the mayor, and that members of that appeals panel. And so the argument the council is making is this really strips a lot of power away from the representative who is closest to the concerns of people.
Yeah. David, another question. It would create a digital city map to modernize city operations. It seems like a pretty minor thing to put on the ballot. What's that about?
Yeah, this was pretty interesting, and this was new to me, but it's kind of like a cool bit of history, though I guess you wouldn't say that if you're a developer or the city trying to push a project through here, that all of the city's official maps are on paper in borough offices, and so a developer trying to make a change to the city map to rezone has to go to that office, pull that map, and suggest the change based on that, and it's considered like a choke point in the process, like another thing they could streamline. And I was talking to some people who are involved in this, and they said some of these maps go back to the 19th century, so that's why when I say it's a cool bit of history, this would just simply digitize them and get rid of those extra steps of going through the paper maps.
So, Brigid, final question here, and this is not to malign anybody in this room. I'm sure everybody here votes in mayoral elections, so I'm not shaming anybody here. But turnout in city elections tends to be lower than maybe some would like it to be, right? And some say, well, that's because we hold our mayoral elections on off years and not presidential election years. One of these ballot measures would change that to align that. Talk about that.
So it's a proposal that would support a move in Albany to shift our elections to even years to align them with the presidential election years. Under the New York State Constitution, cities are required, including New York City, to hold their elections in odd-numbered years. In order for this to pass, in order for this to change, it would need to both change here locally to show support and then ultimately through a state constitutional amendment, which is a longer process. There's debate about whether this is the right way to go. There is a lot of research that shows moving to even numbered years to align it with the presidential election will dramatically increase turnout, and places that do hold their elections in even number of years see upwards of 10 times, they see increases of 10 times the amount of what they were seeing during municipal election years. However, think of how much mail you get in a midterm cycle. Think of how much mail you get in a presidential election cycle. Now put that all together with the mayoral race and the city council race, and the concern among some is that these local elections could get drowned out. It's something to weigh. At this point, we have historically seen declining turnout in municipal election years, meaning a very small number of people are electing people who have a lot of power over things that impact our lives very directly. In some cases, you might argue more so than some of the state and federal officials. You want a street sign, you want a speed bump, you want to see a new school. That's something that's happening at the local level. And so those elections are really important. That's why we spend a lot of time in WNYC talking about them. And so it's something to think about when you decide whether or not to vote yes or no on this question. Do you think that moving to an even number year and driving up turnout is worth potentially having to sift through a whole lot more information in order to make your decisions?
Well, it's WNYC's Brigid, Bergin, and David Brand. If you have more questions and you have some things to ask, I don't want to
Be here.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm violating their space by saying that you can ask them questions. They're some of the smartest people in the city. So if you have any more questions about the election, they're definitely here to help. That's what we're here for. So.